just a little off the top. Specialist. Helps you fit in with the real soldiers, the shears, dull and gritty with pocket lint, snagged and pulled at her hair, the sound of coarse violation in the tense air of the maintenance bay. The crowd of onlookers, a motley crew of infantry grunts and mechanics taking a break from the oppressive heat, laughed. It was a brittle, nervous sound, the kind of laughter that seeks to align itself with the perceived power in the room, a desperate bid for inclusion at another's expense. Specialist Eva Rostova said nothing. She didn't flinch as chunks of her plain brown hair fell to the dusty concrete floor, mingling with grease stains and brass shavings. Her gaze remained fixed on the complex diagnostic interface of the Mark IV Environmental Control Unit, her expression as placid and unreadable as the desert horizon. Her hands, steady and precise, continued to manipulate the delicate fiber-optic conduits, her focus an impenetrable fortress against the tide of mockery. But when General Madsen, 3 hours later and a world away in terms of consequence, would see her stance, the subtle, perfect balance, the economy of motion, the absolute calm in the heart of a raging crisis, he would see not a victim, but a weapon. He would see a professional so far beyond their petty taunts that they might as well have been children throwing pebbles at a mountain. If you believe that true strength is measured not in the volume of the voice, but in the precision of the hand, type competence below. The air in forward operating bay Scorpion was thick with more than just dust and diesel fumes. It was choked with a simmering, anxious frustration. For 72 hours, the primary long-range sensor array, the all-seeing eye that was supposed to guard the valley against incursions, had been down. A cascade failure in the primary cooling system had fried 3 separate logic boards, and the replacement parts were still 2 days out, assuming the supply convoy didn't hit an IED. Every soldier on the FOB felt the blindness as a physical vulnerability, a constant itch between their shoulder blades. Into this cauldron of tension walked Staff Sergeant Decker, a man whose 15 years in the infantry had forged his opinions into unyielding steel. He saw the world in simple binaries, strong and weak, loud and silent, useful and useless. When he saw Specialist Rostova, flown in on a priority requisition to fix a system no one else understood, he saw only weakness. She was small, unassuming, and her uniform, though clean, seemed a size too big for her slender frame. She moved with a quiet efficiency that he mistook for timidity, and her silence in the face of his loud, boisterous command style was, in his eyes, a sign of disrespect or incompetence. The head shaving had been his idea, a cruel piece of theater designed to assert his dominance and toughen her up. He'd gathered his cronies in the vehicle bay where she was working, framing it as a traditional welcome for new arrivals. The shears were a prop, the laughter was the script, and her humiliation was the intended climax. Yet, she refused to play her part. As the last lock of hair was crudely sheared away, leaving a patchy, uneven stubble, her focus never wavered from the task at hand. She simply reached up, brushed a few stray hairs from her collar, and continued her diagnostic sequence. Her lack of reaction was a void into which Decker's arrogance fell and was swallowed whole. It infuriated him. He had expected tears, or anger, or at the very least, a frightened plea. He got nothing, just the quiet, rhythmic tap of her fingers on a datapad and the soft hum of the machinery she was tending to. This silent defiance was a greater insult than any shouted retort could ever be. It was the calm of a master craftsman, deaf to the barking of a stray dog. The other soldiers felt it too. Their laughter faltered, dying in their throats as they witnessed not the breaking of a person, but the revealing of a composure so profound it bordered on inhuman. They had come for a spectacle of power, but the power dynamics were mysteriously, unsettlingly, inverting before their very eyes. Staff Sergeant Decker, feeling his audience slip away, doubled down, his voice growing louder to fill the vacuum of respect he was creating. Back in my day, he boomed, pacing in a tight circle around the kneeling specialist. We didn't need fancy toys and keyboard jockeys to win a war. We needed grit. We needed soldiers who could carry 100 pounds of gear through a sandstorm and still have the fire in their belly to close with and destroy the enemy. He gestured dismissively at the complex array of wires and monitors surrounding Rostova. This is a distraction. We're teaching a generation of soldiers to hide behind screens instead of learning how to fight. He stopped directly in front of her, forcing her to look up from her work if she wanted to see past his dusty combat boots. Look at her. Probably never even zeroed a rifle properly. Probably get a panic attack if the Wi-Fi goes down in the chow hall. He was performing now, playing to the cheap seats, trying to win back the crowd with familiar, comfortable prejudices. They sent us a technician who looks like she just got lost on her way to college orientation, and they expect her to fix a multi-million-dollar piece of kit that keeps us all alive. I've seen more intensity in a sack of wet sand. The insults were a barrage, each one designed to chip away at her composure, to force a reaction, any reaction, that would validate his authority. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably. The initial thrill of the prank had curdled into a sour unease. Decker's monologue felt less like a lesson in military tradition and more like a desperate display of insecurity. They watched Rostova, expecting her to finally break, to say something, to defend herself. Instead, she completed her diagnostic, a small green light blinking to life on the panel in front of her. She then reached in her toolkit and selected a magnetic microdriver, her movements fluid and economical. Without a word, she turned back to an access port on the machine, her focus absolute. Her silence wasn't passive, it was active. It was a dam holding back an ocean of expertise, a quiet statement that his words were irrelevant noise in a world of precise signals. She was a surgeon in the middle of a critical operation, and he was a loud, ignorant bystander in the gallery. The more he spoke, the more he exposed his own obsolescence. He was a man screaming about the virtues of swords in an age of gunpowder, and her quiet, methodical work was the sound of the rifle being loaded. The isolation she felt was a tangible thing, a bubble of professional focus in a room full of hostile energy. Yet, she seemed not just to endure it, but to draw strength from it. It was the quiet that allowed her to hear the subtle, almost inaudible frequency shift in the machine's power converter, the very problem that had eluded the base's best technicians for 3 days. She didn't need their approval or their understanding. She just needed them to be quiet long enough for her to finish the job. The crisis, when it came, arrived with the shriek of a priority alert tone that cut through the FOB's mundane rhythm like a razor. A long-range reconnaissance patrol, call sign Wolverine 3, had been ambushed in the Serpent's Tooth, a notorious canyon system 15 clicks east. Their last transmission was a frantic whisper of heavy contact, followed by the deafening hiss of sophisticated electronic jamming. They were blind, deaf, and pinned down. The command tent, usually a hub of calm professionalism, became a vortex of controlled chaos. Maps were illuminated, communication officers shouted into headsets, and the grim reality of the situation settled over everyone like a shroud. The Serpent's Tooth was a black hole for signals, a natural fortress of granite and magnetic interference that the enemy had now layered with powerful jamming technology. A storm front, a monstrous wall of sand and lightning, was rolling in from the west, grounding all air support. The QRF, the Quick Reaction Force, was ready to roll, but without precise coordinates. Sending them in would be a suicide mission, feeding them piecemeal into a well-laid trap. The base commander, a grizzled colonel with worry etched deep into his face, slammed his fist on the tactical table. They're ghosting us. We have no eyes, no ears. We're throwing darts in the dark. It was in that moment of collective despair that Rostova acted. She had heard the alert, had processed the fragments of tactical chatter with the same dispassionate analysis she applied to a faulty circuit board. She stood up, her movements still devoid of any hurry or panic. She walked past the gawking NCOs, past the frantic officers, and made her way to a large, unassuming black Pelican case that had been stored in the corner of the tent, ignored by everyone. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't announce her intentions. She simply knelt, her fingers flying across the case's biometric locks. With a soft hiss of depressurizing air, the case opened. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a tool or a weapon that anyone recognized. It was a drone, But unlike the bulky predators and reapers they were used to, this was a thing of sleek, predatory beauty. Its composite body was matte black, designed to absorb rather than reflect light and radar. Its wings were swept back in an aggressive, almost organic design, and it had no visible propellers or jet intakes. It looked less like a machine and more like a piece of captured alien technology. This was the XQ-117 Ghost Wing, a prototype so classified that its very existence was a rumor whispered only in the highest echelons of strategic command. Rostova's hands moved over the drone in a practiced, intimate ritual. She slotted in a solid-state power cell, its contacts clicking into place with a satisfying finality. She ran a gloved finger along the leading edge of the wings, checking for imperfections. Then, she assembled her control rig, a custom-built unit that looked more like a virtual reality headset and haptic gloves than any standard military interface. It was a seamless extension of her own nervous system. Her preparation was a silent symphony of competence, a stark contrast to the loud, impotent panic that filled the rest of the tent. She was creating a solution while everyone else was still defining the problem. Staff Sergeant Decker, who had followed the commotion into the command tent, let out a contemptuous snort. What in the hell is that toy supposed to do? You gonna fly a kite into a hurricane? His voice, accustomed to commanding attention, was barely a whisper in the gravity of the command tent, yet his disdain was palpable. But the colonel, desperate and willing to grasp at any straw, saw the unwavering confidence in Rostova's posture. He saw the methodical precision of her pre-flight check. He had lost men to long odds before and was not about to lose any more because of pride. He gave Rostova a single, curt nod. Permission granted. Without a word of acknowledgement, Rostova stepped out into the swirling wind that heralded the coming storm. The sky was a bruised purple. She placed the Ghost Wing on the ground, and with a few deft taps on her forearm-mounted console, its internal systems hummed to life. There was no roar of an engine, just a barely audible, high-frequency vibration. The drone lifted off the ground vertically, silent as its namesake, and hovered for a moment at eye level before banking sharply and accelerating into the maelstrom with impossible speed. It simply vanished into the dark clouds. Inside the tent, all eyes were on the large central monitor, which now displayed Rostova's interface. It was a dizzying flood of telemetry, topographical data, and sensor readings that were utterly incomprehensible to anyone else. Then, the main screen switched to the drone's forward view, and a collective gasp went through the room. The Ghost Wing was flying through the Serpent's Tooth, but not high above it. It was flying inside the canyon, hugging the rock walls, its silent propulsion system leaving no heat signature, its advanced flight controls allowing it to execute maneuvers that would tear a conventional aircraft apart. Rostova was flying at dead stick. The jamming was too powerful for a remote link. She was navigating on inertial data and a 3D terrain map she had memorized, her hands in the haptic gloves making thousands of micro-corrections per second, feeling the turbulence off the canyon walls as if she were there herself. She was flying blind, 1,000 miles an hour in the dark. The tension in the tent was unbearable. It was a feat of piloting that defied all known limitations of man and machine. Then, on the screen, a new window opened. Static. Rostova's fingers danced over her console, her brow furrowed in concentration for the first time. The static resolved, pixel by painful pixel, into a coherent image. It was a crystal clear, top-down thermal view. Wolverine 3 was there, huddled behind a rock outcropping, and surrounding them, in camouflage positions the eye would never see, were 3 heavy machine gun nests and 2 mortar teams. The trap was laid bare. A wave of profound, absolute silence washed over the command tent. The loud, panicked shouting of moments before was gone, replaced by a stunned, reverent hush. The image on the screen was not just data, it was salvation. The tactical officers, shaking off their awe, began shouting coordinates, their voices crisp and professional. The artillery officer was already on the radio, his words a calm, lethal prayer. Fire mission, grid 4-7-9 yard, danger close. Decker stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. The blood had drained from his face, leaving a pasty, gray mask of disbelief. The world he understood, a world of simple, brutal strength, had just been irrevocably shattered by a quiet woman with a bad haircut and a machine he dismissed as a toy. The words no way formed on his lips, but made no sound. His arrogance, so loud in solid moments before, had evaporated into thin, shocked air. He was a dinosaur watching the meteor streak across the sky, a sudden, terrifying premonition of his own extinction. Just as the first salvos of artillery screamed overhead, their departure a satisfying thud that vibrated through the tent's floor, a new sound intruded. The distinct, powerful thumping of a Black Hawk helicopter making a hard landing just outside. This was unscheduled, unexpected. The force of its rotor wash blasted the tent flaps open, sending maps and papers flying. Through the swirling vortex of dust and grit, a figure emerged, striding with an urgency that commanded absolute authority. It was General Marcus Madsen, commander of Joint Special Operations Command for the entire theater. A living legend, a four-star general whose face was usually only seen on secure video conferences. His presence on a remote FOB like this was unheard of, a cataclysmic event in the base's small, self-contained world. He strode into the command tent, his aide-de-camp scrambling to keep up. The room, already silent in awe of Rostova, became tomb-like. Every officer and NCO snapped to rigid attention. Madsen, however, barely seemed to notice. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the room in a single, comprehensive glance, absorbing the entire tactical situation in seconds. He saw the live feed from the Ghost Wing, the targeting data being relayed to the artillery, the looks of stunned disbelief on the faces of the command staff. And then his gaze landed on Specialist Eva Rostova. She was still at her console, her body a study in focused stillness, her shaved head somehow making her look more intense, more stripped down to her essential purpose. She had not turned, had not acknowledged his arrival. She was still flying the mission, guiding the drone to provide a final battle damage assessment as the artillery rounds impacted with devastating precision. Madsen's hard expression softened for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something that looked like recognition, or perhaps pride, crossed his features. He walked past the saluting colonel, his boots making soft, determined sounds on the dusty floor. He stopped not at the command table, but a few feet behind Rostova. He didn't look at the main screen. He looked at her hands, at the small, custom-built console she was using. He saw a small, stenciled marking on the side of the unit, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. P5 LRP for Project Ghostwing, Lead Resource Pilot. Phase 5, it was an inside joke, a designation known to only 5 people on the planet. And he was one of them. He knew, in that instant, exactly who she was and what she was doing on his FOB. He also saw the crude, patchy state of her shaved head and the lingering smirks on the faces of some of the grunts in the back of the tent, and his flicker of pride was instantly replaced by a cold, controlled fury. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He knew that one of the most brilliant operational minds he had ever encountered had been subjected to some form of brutish, ignorant hazing. The disrespect was not just to the specialist. It was a direct affront to him and the multi-billion-dollar strategic asset he had personally championed. General Madsen turned to the base colonel, his voice deceptively calm, but laced with an Arctic chill that made the hairs on everyone's neck stand up. "Colonel, give me this specialist personnel file." Now, the colonel, flustered by the general's presence and the sheer intensity of his focus, fumbled with a nearby datapad. He quickly accessed the base's personnel records, his fingers clumsy with haste. He found her file, Rostova Eva, Specialist E4, assigned on temporary duty from a technical intelligence unit. It was a thin, unremarkable record. He handed the datapad to the general. Madsen took it, but his eyes barely glanced at the screen. He knew the official file was a cover, a piece of administrative camouflage. He keyed in a long, complex override code from memory. The screen flickered, and a new file bloomed into existence, its header stamped with classifications that made the colonel physically recoil. Madsen didn't need to read far. The cover sheet said it all. Project Ghostwing. Position, lead design and field operations pilot, a title that didn't exist in any official military register because the project itself was technically a ghost. Below there was a string of security clearances, top secret SCI, SAP, that made the colonel's own credentials look like a public library card. There were commendations signed by the Secretary of Defense, technical papers she had authored that were revolutionizing stealth aerodynamics, and a log of over 2,000 simulated and live combat flight hours on the Ghostwing system. And at the bottom, a direct signatory authorization, a digital signature that gave her absolute operational authority over the asset, an authority that superseded conventional rank. The signature was his own, General Marcus Madsen. He lowered the datapad. His face was a mask of cold, hard granite. He turned away from the pale-faced colonel and walked towards Rostova, who had just landed the drone and was beginning her post-operation shutdown sequence. He stopped precisely 3 feet from her, drew himself up to his full height, and executed a salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was a formal, textbook-perfect salute, rendered with a crispness and solemnity that was breathtaking to witness. He held it, his arm rigid, his gaze locked on the small, quiet specialist. The entire command tent held its breath. A 4-star general, a living icon of command, was saluting a specialist with a butchered haircut. The universe had been turned upside down. Rostova finally looked up, her expression unreadable. She returned the salute with a simple, efficient nod, her duty complete. Madsen dropped his hand and spoke, his voice resonating with an authority that could crack stone. Specialist Rostova, on behalf of the United States Armed Forces, I apologize for the state of your reception here. Your performance under pressure was, as always, exemplary. He then pivoted, his blazing eyes sweeping across the entire room, finally landing on Staff Sergeant Decker, who looked as if he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. For those of you who are confused, Madsen's voice boomed. Let me be absolutely clear. This specialist is not a technician. She is the chief architect and lead pilot of the most advanced ISR platform this world has ever seen. Her technical rank is a matter of administrative convenience. By the authority granted to me by the Department of Defense in this theater of operations, her directives on all matters concerning Project Ghostwing carry my full and unequivocal weight. On this system, she effectively outranks everyone in this room, including myself. Is that understood? The story of a general's salute spread through FOB Scorpion like a wildfire in a dry canyon. It started as whispers in the command tent, then became hushed conversations in the chow hall, and by nightfall, it was the sole topic of discussion in every barracks and guard tower. The narrative transformed with each retelling. Rostova became a ghost, a secret weapon, a civilian genius in a soldier's uniform. The details of her impossible flight were exaggerated until she was practically a mythological figure, a pilot who could see through mountains and fly on the wind itself. The head-shaving incident, once a source of crude amusement, was now recounted as a cautionary tale of catastrophic ignorance. The shears Decker had used were reportedly found thrown in a burn pit, as if they were a cursed object. Decker himself became a pariah. He was the living embodiment of the FOB's collective shame. The next morning, he was summoned to the colonel's office. He was forced to stand at rigid attention for 10 agonizing minutes while the colonel, with General Madsen standing silently by the window, delivered a formal reprimand that stripped him of his authority and his dignity layer by painful layer. He was reassigned from his platoon leader role to inventory management in the supply depot, a public and humiliating demotion. But the official punishment was nothing compared to the internal one. Decker's entire identity, built on a foundation of physical toughness and loud, unquestionable authority, had been pulverized. He had built his world on a simple set of rules, and a quiet woman half his size had shown him that those rules were obsolete. That evening, he found Rostova in the maintenance bay, where she was meticulously cleaning and recalibrating the Ghostwing. He approached not with his usual swagger, but with the shuffling, hesitant steps of a broken man. He stood before her, his head bowed, unable to meet her gaze. "Specialist," he began, his voice a hoarse, unfamiliar whisper. "What I did, there's no excuse. It was ignorant. It was wrong. I am sorry. Rostova paused her work, looking at him for a long moment. There was no anger in her eyes, no triumph. There was only a calm, analytical assessment. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Decker, emboldened by her lack of malice, pressed on. That thing, the way you flew it. I've never seen anything like it. I don't understand it. But I know it's the future. And I'm being left behind. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate, genuine plea. Could you teach me? Not how to fly it. Just what it does. How it helps us. The grunts on the ground. I need to understand. He was asking not just for knowledge, but for a kind of absolution, a path back from the ignorant wasteland he now found himself in. True to her nature, Specialist Rostova accepted Decker's apology and his plea for knowledge with that same quiet nod. There were no lectures on humility, no demands for penance. For her, the incident was closed. The mission was what mattered, and part of that mission was ensuring the soldiers on the ground understood the capabilities of the assets designed to protect them. The next day, a small, curious group of infantrymen, with a humbled Staff Sergeant Decker standing awkwardly at the back, gathered around the Ghost Wing. Rostova, using a portable display, began to explain the drone's sensor package. She spoke in clear, concise terms, stripping away the complex jargon and focusing on the practical applications. The synthetic aperture radar can map terrain through sandstorms and smoke, she explained, pointing to a diagram. The thermal imager isn't just for heat signatures. It can detect ground disturbances, helping you identify potential IEDs from a safe distance. She spoke of its ability to intercept and triangulate enemy communications, to provide overwatch for a patrol with a level of detail that was previously unimaginable. She wasn't boasting. She was teaching. She was a master of her craft, sharing her knowledge, her passion for the technology's life-saving potential evident in her calm, authoritative tone. Decker listened, rapt. He saw not a toy, but a guardian angel forged from carbon fiber and silicon. He asked intelligent questions about integrating the drone's data into platoon-level tactical planning. Rostova answered each one with patience and precision. In that dusty maintenance bay, a profound shift occurred. The culture of the FOB began to change, moving from a place of brute force tradition to one that valued intelligent adaptation. Rostova's legacy was not one of revenge or vindication, but of education. She was building a bridge between the old guard and the new reality, using her quiet competence as the foundation. The colonel, witnessing this, made a decision. The custom control console Rostova had used was moved from its temporary spot into a permanent, custom-built station in the command tent. A few days later, a small, polished brass plaque appeared on it, affixed by the colonel himself. It read, Rostova's Station, Eyes of the Ghost Wing. It became a landmark, a physical reminder that the most effective operator is not always the one with the most stripes on their sleeve, and the most powerful weapon is not always the one that makes the most noise. New officers and NCOs arriving at the FOB would be taken to the station, and they would be told the story. It became a part of the base's institutional memory, a lesson in humility passed down from one rotation to the next. The station was a touchstone, a symbol of a new kind of warrior, one whose strength lay in their intellect, their calm, and their unwavering dedication to the mission. Months later, the ripple effects of the FOB Scorpion incident, as it was now known in classified after-action reports, had spread far beyond the Dusty Valley. The successful, life-saving deployment of the Ghost Wing under extreme combat conditions had been the final piece of data General Madsen needed. The program was pulled from the shadows, its budget quintupled, and its deployment accelerated across the entire theater of operations. The tactics Rostova had single-handedly pioneered, low-altitude canyon flight, active jammer penetration, real-time artillery integration, were now standard operating procedure, codified in training manuals, and credited with saving dozens of lives in subsequent engagements. As state-of-the-art training facility back in the States, a new class of drone operators sat in advanced simulators. Their instructor, a seasoned master sergeant, brought up a slide on the main screen. It was a grainy photo of the brass plaque on Rostova's station. Before we begin, the instructor said, his voice resonating with reverence. "You all need to hear the story of Specialist Rostova." He recounted the events, the humiliation, the crisis, the impossible flight, and the general salute. He used it as the primary teaching example for the core tenets of their new program. That their value was not in their rank, but in their skill. That they would face skepticism from those who didn't understand the new face of warfare, and that their response should always be calm, undeniable competence. The story had become folklore, a foundational myth for a new generation of warriors. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, at an NCO academy, another instructor stood before a class of aspiring sergeants. This instructor was different. He spoke with a quiet humility that was at odds with the rows of ribbons on his chest. It was Decker. He had not been drummed out of the service. Instead, General Madsen, seeing the profound change in the man, had personally reassigned him to the academy. His new mission was to teach the most important lesson of his career. He used his own story, his own monumental failure of judgment, as his primary teaching tool. "I was a good sergeant," he told the young NCOs, his voice steady. "I knew how to lead men in a firefight. But I was arrogant. I was ignorant. I assumed strength only looked one way. I confused volume with value. I nearly cost good men their lives because my pride got in the way of the mission." He looked at the faces of the future leaders of the military. The battlefield is changing. The threats are changing, and we have to change with it. Your job is not to enforce the traditions of the past. Your job is to recognize competence in whatever form it appears, being a specialist with a datapad or a private with a rifle. Respect is not about rank. It is about capability. Never, ever forget that he had become the most fervent advocate for the very thing he once mocked. His personal shame forged into a powerful lesson for hundreds of others. This was Rostova's true, lasting impact. It wasn't just the lives she saved on one day. It was the culture she changed for years to come, a legacy of humility and adaptation that spread quietly, powerfully, and permanently. True legacy is not a monument carved from stone, left to be weathered by time. It is not a name etched onto a wall of heroes. True legacy is a principle, an idea so powerful that it continues to move forward, to evolve, and to shape the actions of others long after the initial event has passed. Eva Rostova left FOB Scorpion as quietly as she arrived. There was no ceremony, no fanfare. She simply packed her black Pelican case one morning and boarded a helicopter, disappearing back into the classified world from which she came. But she left behind a profound and permanent change. The shaved head, once intended as a mark of humiliation, had been reframed in the collective memory of the base. It became a symbol of her absolute focus, her shedding of all superficial concerns, ego, vanity, pride, in favor of singular dedication to her craft. It was remembered not as a scalp of shame, but as a crown of competence earned not by birthright or rank, but by a demonstration of impossible skill under unimaginable pressure. The story of her quiet triumph became a lens through which soldiers began to see their world differently. They started to look past the superficial to question their own ingrained assumptions. They listened more to the quiet technician in the corner. They valued the analyst who saw patterns no one else did. They respected the medic whose hands were steady in the chaos. The idea that worth is proven through action, not assertion, began to take root. The future of conflict, they were learning, would not be won by the loudest voice in the room, but by the calmest mind, the steadiest hand, and the clearest eye. It would be won by the quiet professionals, the men and women like Rostova, who operate in the silent spaces between chaos and precision, wielding intellect and technology as their primary weapons. They're the ghosts in the machine, the silent architects of victory, their reward not in medals or recognition, but in the quiet satisfaction of a mission accomplished, of lives saved, and of a job done to a standard no one else could meet. They prove, time and time again, that respect is a currency earned in silence and paid in deeds. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over ignorant arrogance, and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.